The review appeared on every public screen across the grand consumption floor at exactly midday, when foot traffic was at its heaviest. A Hiluvan food critic named Delegate Foreign had written it, and the words were not kind. He called human cuisine inoffensive but forgettable, much like the species itself. He gave the Earth food stall a rating of 2 out of 15 and suggested that visitors skip it entirely unless they needed something to help them sleep. Ravi Deshwal read it standing behind his counter, arms folded, jaw tight. He read it twice. Then he wiped down his already clean cooking surface and said nothing that he had been on Horizon Ring for 11 days. The Galactic trade station was enormous, a rotating wheel of metal and glass where dozens of alien species came to trade, negotiate, and eat. The grand consumption floor was the social heart of the station, a vast open hall lined with food stalls from every member world. Each species prepared its own cuisine and offered it to anyone willing to try. It was supposed to be a place of cultural exchange and mutual respect. Ravi was the first human chef ever assigned to run a permanent stall here. Earth had only joined the Galactic Commons 8 years ago, and humanity was still considered a minor species. Unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of civilization that other species smiled at politely and then ignored. Advisor Sahi had made the mission very clear before Ravi left Earth. Keep it safe. Keep it simple. Do not alarm anyone. Do not give them a reason to shut us down. Humanity needed friends in the Commons, not incidents. So Ravi had followed orders. He served plain steamed rice, boiled vegetables, and a broth so mild it was basically warm water with a memory of salt. He smiled at every alien who approached. He bowed his head when they offered their polite, empty compliments. He watched them take a single bite, nod without expression, and walk away. 11 days of this. The Hiluvans were the worst. They were tall, gray-skinned, and deeply convinced that their species sat at the top of galactic civilization. Their own cuisine was a collection of nutrient pastes and flavorless protein blocks. They considered the entire concept of flavor to be a primitive biological trick, something that less evolved species used to convince themselves to eat. Delegate Foreign was their loudest voice on the station, and his review had made it clear where humans stood in his estimation. Somewhere near the bottom dot on the 12th day, a Draenei trader appeared at the counter. She was young, with iridescent blue skin and large dark eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything. Her name was Nessa, and unlike most visitors, she did not look bored. She ordered a plate of rice and vegetables. Ravi served it with his usual careful smile. Nessa ate slowly, chewing with visible concentration. When she finished, she set down her utensils and looked directly at him. Is this really what humans eat? She asked. Ravi hesitated. The safe answer was yes. The diplomatic answer was yes. The answer advisor Sahi would have approved it was absolutely yes. No, Ravi said. This is not even close. Nessa tilted her head. Then why are you serving it? Ravi glanced around the grand consumption floor. Dozens of stalls, dozens of species, all offering their authentic cuisine without apology. The Varadi served their fermented kelp soups. The Draenei offered their crystallized nectar cakes. Even the Hiluvans proudly displayed their tasteless protein blocks as if they were sacred artifacts. Every species here served exactly what they were. Except humans, because I was told to play it safe, Ravi said quietly. Nessa studied him for a long moment. That is a shame, she said. I came here because I heard humans were supposed to be interesting. She left a small credit chip on the counter and walked away. That night, Ravi sat in his quarters and stared at the sealed crate in the corner. He had brought it from Earth, packed it himself, wrapped every jar and pouch with care. His grandmother's spice collection, turmeric from Rajasthan, cumin seeds darkened and fragrant, coriander ground fresh before departure, red chili powder that carried the heat of a summer that never ended, cardamom pods, cloves, black peppercorns, cinnamon bark, bay leaves, fenugreek. His grandmother had pressed the crate into his hands at the shuttle port. She had held his face and told him that food was never just food. Food was how you told someone who you were. If you hid your food, you hid yourself. And if you hid yourself, you had already lost. Ravi had promised Sahi he would be careful. He had promised Earth's diplomatic corps he would not cause trouble. He had followed every rule and every guideline and every cautious instruction. And a Heluvan critic had called humanity forgettable. Ravi knelt beside the crate and broke the seal. The smell hit him immediately. Warm, layered, alive. Cumin and coriander and something deeper underneath. Something that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen and the sound of oil crackling in a hot pan and the feeling of belonging to something ancient and unbreakable. He lifted out the first jar. Turmeric, golden and bright and unapologetic. He had not crossed the galaxy to serve plain rice. He had not left everything behind to be polite and forgettable and safe. He was a cook. His people had been cooks for thousands of years, long before they ever looked at the stars. They had taken fire and clay and the raw gifts of the earth and turned them into something that made life worth living. Tomorrow, Ravi decided, the grand consumption floor was going to find out what human food actually tasted like. He set the turmeric on his workbench and reached for the cumin. Nobody noticed the turmeric at first. It was just color. The rice went from white to pale gold, and the aliens who wandered past the Earth's stall glanced at it with mild curiosity, but nothing more. One Aluvan paused, scanned the plate with a portable analyzer, confirmed it was safe, and moved on without ordering. Ravi smiled to himself. He had expected this. Turmeric was the quiet one, the foundation. You did not taste turmeric so much as you felt it. A warmth underneath everything else, a color that promised something deeper was coming. The next morning, he added cumin to the broth. Just a small amount, toasted in a dry pan until the seeds crackled and released their smoke. The broth changed. It was still simple, still safe, still technically within every dietary guideline the station council had established. But now it had a voice that a variety dock worker was the first to react. He was a broad creature with thick gray plates covering his arms and a face that rarely showed expression. He took a sip of the broth, stopped, and looked down into the bowl as if something had moved inside it. He took another sip, then another. He finished the entire bowl without looking up. That he set it down and stared at Ravi. "What did you put in this?" he asked. "Cumin," Ravi said. "It is a seed from Earth." The variety said nothing for a long time. Then he placed double the usual credits on the counter and walked away. By the end of the first week, Ravi had added coriander to the vegetables and a whisper of black pepper to everything. The changes were small enough that no alarm was raised. The station's automated food safety systems scanned his stall twice a day and found nothing dangerous. Every ingredient was classified as safe for all known species. But something was shifting. The aliens who visited his stall began to pause. They did not just eat and leave. They sat. They chewed slowly. Some of them closed their eyes. A few came back the next day without being able to explain why. They did not have words for what was happening because most galactic species had never experienced food that made them feel anything at all. Nessa returned on the fourth day. She sat at the counter and ate a bowl of the cumin broth and the turmeric rice and the coriander vegetables. And when she finished, she set her spoon down and looked at Ravi with those large dark eyes. "This is different," she said. "Yes," Ravi said. "This is what you were hiding." Ravi shrugged. "This is barely the beginning," he said. Nessa leaned forward. She told him that she had eaten food from 11 different species across 3 sectors of the galaxy. She told him that the Draenei considered eating to be a private, functional act, like breathing. She told him that in 42 years of life, no meal had ever made her want to sit still and pay attention. Until now, she said. She became a daily regular after that. Every afternoon, she appeared at the counter, ordered whatever Ravi had prepared, and ate it in focused silence. Sometimes she asked questions about the spices. Sometimes she just sat and watched him cook. Word spread the way it always does in enclosed spaces, quietly through the lower decks, among the workers and traders who had no interest in politics or diplomacy. The dock crews, the maintenance teams, the cargo haulers who worked double shifts and ate whatever was cheapest and fastest. They started lining up at Ravi's stall because someone had told someone who had told someone that the human food was different. The line grew from 5 to 10 to 20 that Commander Brell noticed on the 9th day. He was the station's Hiluvan security chief, a rigid officer who kept the grand consumption floor under constant surveillance. He did not like anomalies. A human food stall drawing crowds was an anomaly. He ordered a full inspection. Two security officers arrived at Ravi's stall with scanning equipment and spent 40 minutes testing every ingredient, every surface, every utensil. They tested the air around the stall. They tested the residue on used plates. They ran toxicology screens for over 300 known harmful compounds. Everything came back clean. Commander Brell reviewed the results personally. He found no violations, no contamination, no van substances, just dried plants from a minor planet in an unremarkable solar system. He filed the results and said nothing, but Ravi noticed the way Brell looked at the growing line of customers. There was suspicion in that look, and patience, the kind of patience that meant he was waiting for a mistake. That evening, Advisor Sahi appeared at the stall. She was a composed woman who had spent 6 years navigating galactic diplomacy, and she did not raise her voice. But her concern was visible. "You're drawing attention," she said. "That I am cooking," Ravi replied. "You were told to keep things simple." Ravi looked at her. "I am using turmeric, cumin, coriander, and black pepper. For ingredients. That is simple." Sahi studied him for a moment. She knew him well enough to recognize stubbornness when she saw it. She told him to be careful. She told him that Commander Brell was watching. She told him that one wrong step could set humanity's reputation back years. Ravi nodded politely and waited until she left. Then he went to his quarters, opened the spice crate, and pulled out the garam masala blend his grandmother had packed in a cloth pouch. He ground it fresh that night. Cardamom, cloves, cinnamon, black pepper, cumin, the sound of the mortar and pestle filling the small room like a heartbeat. The aroma drifted through the service corridor for the first time. A passing Drenai maintenance worker stopped in the hallway, turned toward the smell, and stood completely still for almost a full minute before continuing on her way. Ravi sealed the fresh powder in a jar and set it beside his workstation. Tomorrow, the real cooking would begin. The smell reached the grand consumption floor before Ravi did. He arrived at his stall carrying 2 large pots, and by the time he set them on the burners, 3 aliens were already standing at the counter, nostrils or sensory slits wide open, trying to identify what they were detecting. Ravi had spent the entire previous night cooking. Butter chicken simmered in a sauce of tomatoes, cream, and a careful blend of garam masala, turmeric, and fenugreek. Dal tadka, made from red lentils tempered with cumin, garlic, and dried red chilies. Vegetable biryani layered with fragrant basmati rice, saffron, and whole spices. And fresh naan, rolled and baked that morning until it puffed golden and soft. He set up a small sign beside the counter. It listed every dish with a description, the ingredients used, and a human heat rating. Butter chicken was marked as mild. Dal tadka was marked as mild to medium. The biryani was marked as medium. Beside each rating, he had written a note in clear galactic standard text. This dish contains active flavor compounds. Humans consider this normal. Your experience may vary. Nobody took the warning seriously. The first customer of the day was a Hiluvan ambassador named Durrell. He was a colleague of Delegate Foreign, the critic who had written the insulting review weeks earlier. Durrell approached the stall with the kind of casual arrogance that Hiluvans wore like a second skin. He ordered the butter chicken because the word mild was next to it, and mild sounded safe. Ravi served him a plate with rice and a generous portion of the sauce. The butter chicken was not hot. It was not meant to be hot. It was meant to be rich and deep and layered, the kind of dish that started soft and then unfolded slowly across the tongue. Cream first, then tomato, then the warm glow of spices that had been cooked low and slow until they became something greater than the sum of their parts. Durrell took one bite and stopped moving. His gray face did something Ravi had never seen a Hiluvan face do before. It softened. The rigid composure cracked, just for a moment, and underneath it was something raw and unguarded. Surprise. Not the polite, controlled kind. The real kind. The kind that happens when something reaches a part of you that you did not know existed. Durrell sat in complete silence for nearly a full minute. Then, without saying a word, he pulled his plate closer and continued eating. He finished everything. He used the naan to wipe the last traces of sauce from the plate. Then he looked up at Ravi, opened his mouth as if to speak, closed it again, and walked away. He came back an hour later and ordered a second plate, by midday. The line at Ravi's stall stretched across the grand consumption floor. A group of Drenai merchants arrived together and ordered the biryani. One of them, a young female with pale blue markings across her face, took her first bite and began laughing. Not a small laugh. A full, uncontrollable burst of sound that turned heads across the entire hall. Ravi later learned that the Drenai nervous system processed certain spice compounds, particularly cardamom and clove, as a form of euphoria. The biryani was essentially making her happy in a way her biology had never experienced before. Her companions stared at her. Then they started eating. Within minutes, 3 of the 5 were laughing too. Nessa arrived at her usual time and found the stall surrounded. She pushed through the crowd, sat at the counter, and ordered the dal tadka. Ravi served it with fresh naan and watched her face as she took the first bite. Nessa did not laugh. She did not gasp or freeze or show any dramatic reaction. She simply closed her eyes and ate in slow, deliberate silence. When she finished, she opened her eyes and looked at Ravi with an expression that was almost reverent. "This is the greatest thing I have ever eaten," she said. And she meant it. Within a week, the Earth stall had the longest line on the grand consumption floor. Other vendors noticed. The Hiluvan nutrient paste station, which had been the most visited stall for years, was losing customers daily. The Varadi fermented kelp stand had gone from serving 50 bowls a day to fewer than 20. Even the popular Drenai nectar cake booth saw its traffic drop by half. Complaints began to gather. Quietly at first, a few vendors mentioned it to the station council. Then a formal document was filed. It carried the signatures of 11 different species food representatives, and it accused the human stall of using psychoactive substances disguised as cooking ingredients. The document argued that the neurological responses observed in multiple species, euphoria, emotional vulnerability, compulsive return visits, were consistent with chemical dependency, not normal dining. Commander Brell received the complaint with visible satisfaction. He had been waiting for this. He forwarded it to the station council with a recommendation for immediate investigation and a note suggesting that the human stall be suspended pending review. The council agreed to convene a formal hearing. Ravi received the notification that evening. He read it at his counter while the last customers of the day finished their plates around him. Nessa sat nearby, watching his face. "What will you do?" she asked. Ravi folded the notification and tucked it into his apron. "I will go to their hearing," he said, "and I will bring my spices." He looked out across the grand consumption floor. The other vendors' stalls were quiet. His was still humming with conversation and the clink of utensils. "They think this is a weapon," he said quietly. "They have no idea it is just dinner." 12 jars lined the table in front of Ravi. Small, ordinary, sealed with cloth and string. They looked like nothing. They looked like something a child might collect from a garden. The council chamber was large and circular, designed to hold representatives from every species on the station, and every seat was full. The air was heavy with tension and the quiet hum of translation devices working overtime. Commander Brell stood at the prosecution podium, his gray uniform pressed sharp, his posture rigid with satisfaction. Beside him sat Delegate Foreign, the food critic who had dismissed human cuisine weeks ago. Foreign looked less satisfied and more uncomfortable, as if being here meant admitting that the food he had called forgettable had somehow become the most talked about thing on the station. The complaint was read aloud. 11 species had signed it. The charges were serious. The human food stall was accused of introducing psychoactive compounds into its dishes, causing neurological disruption across multiple species, creating artificial dependency patterns, and operating under false safety classifications. Commander Brell presented the evidence with clinical precision. He showed footage of the Drenai merchants laughing uncontrollably. He showed biometric data from a Hiluvan diplomat whose emotional response centers had spiked to levels normally associated with mating rituals. He showed the traffic data. Ravi's stall now served more customers than the next 5 stalls combined. The implication was clear. No simple food could do this. Something else was happening. Ravi was called to the center of the chamber. He walked calmly, carrying no data pad, no prepared defense, no legal advocate. He carried only the 12 jars from his table. He set them down one by one and named each of them. Turmeric, a root, dried and ground into powder. Humans have used it for over 4,000 years. Cumin, a seed, toasted to release its oils. Present in human cooking across every continent on Earth. Coriander, another seed, mild, citrus-like, used in almost every human culture since the earliest recorded history. He continued through each jar. Red chili powder, cardamom pods, cloves, cinnamon bark, black peppercorns, bay leaves, fenugreek, garam masala, saffron. These are plants, Ravi said. Dried plants from a small planet that your council barely acknowledges. Every one of them has been scanned by your systems. Every one of them has been classified as safe for all known species. They're not drugs. They're not weapons. They are ingredients. Commander Brell stepped forward. The safety classification is not the issue, he said. The issue is the effect. These substances produce measurable neurological responses in species that have no evolutionary exposure to them. That makes them a risk, regardless of their technical classification, the council murmured. Several delegates nodded. Ravi looked at Brell steadily. Every species on this station produces food that causes some neurological response, he said. The variety serve fermented kelp that contains compounds known to induce deep relaxation in at least 4 other species. The Drenai nectar cakes trigger serotonin-equivalent responses in Hiluvans. Should we shut those stalls down as well? The chamber went quiet. Delegate Foreign rose from his seat. He spoke with the careful, measured tone of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. He argued that the comparison was false. Variety kelp and Drenai cakes produced mild, predictable responses. Human spices produce something different, something excessive. He used the phrase sensory assault. He said it twice, as if repetition made it true. Ravi said nothing. He waited. Then a voice came from the gallery. Nessa stood up. She was not a diplomat or a council member. She was a traitor with no official standing. But she spoke clearly and without hesitation. That I have eaten at the human stall every day for 3 weeks, she said. I have experienced no illness, no dependency, no adverse effects. What I have experienced is the first food in my life that made me want to be present while eating it. If that is a sensory assault, then I have been assaulted willingly. And I would like to be assaulted again tomorrow. Did a ripple of quiet laughter move through the gallery. Then one by one others stood. The Variety dock worker, who had been Ravi's first real customer. A Drenai cargo hauler who had started bringing her entire crew to the stall. A Hiluvan maintenance engineer who had never spoken publicly in his life, but who stood and said simply that the butter chicken made him feel something, and he did not want to go back to feeling nothing. 17 individuals testified. 17 species represented among them. Not one reported harm. The council deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the lead arbiter announced that the decision would be delayed. Further review was required. The stall would remain open during the review period, but under increased monitoring. It was not a victory. But it was not a defeat. Outside the chamber, Advisor Sahi found Ravi leaning against the corridor wall, his 12 jars packed neatly back into their bag. That was risky, she said. Ravi smiled. They call my food a weapon, he said. They brought me in front of the entire station council because I used cumin and coriander. He shook his head. If they think that was dangerous, they have not even tried my medium curry yet. Sahi stared at him. Ravi, she said slowly. Please tell me you are joking. Ravi picked up his bag and started walking back toward the grand consumption floor, but he did not answer. Delegate Foreign made the challenge publicly, which meant he could not take it back. He stood in the center of the grand consumption floor during the busiest hour of the station cycle, surrounded by vendors and customers and floating media drones that broadcast across every deck, and he pointed one long gray finger at the Earth stall. He proposed a controlled demonstration. The human chef would prepare a single dish of his choosing. A panel of 5 representatives, one from each of the major species groups, would consume it under full medical supervision. Biometric monitors, toxicology screens, neurological scans, everything. If any panelist showed adverse effects, any sign of harm, dependency, or dangerous neurological disruption, the stall would be closed permanently and human food would be banned from the station. If the panel showed no adverse effects, the formal complaint would be dismissed entirely. Foran delivered the terms with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. In his mind, the evidence was obvious. Human spices did something unnatural to alien biology. A proper scientific demonstration would prove it beyond doubt, and the strange little human kitchen would be gone by the end of the week. Ravi listened from behind his counter. When Foran finished, the entire floor turned to look at him. He wiped his hands on his apron and said one thing. "I agree, but I cook what I want." Foran hesitated. He had expected negotiation, restrictions, a request for the mildest possible dish. Instead, the human had given himself no safety net. Foran accepted the condition because refusing it would have looked weak. The demonstration was scheduled for 3 days later. The station buzzed. Conversations in corridors, in cargo bays, in sleeping quarters all circled back to the same question. What would the human cook? Nessa found Ravi that evening in his quarters, grinding spices by hand. She sat on the floor beside him and watched the careful rhythm of the mortar and pestle. "What are you making?" she asked. "Chicken curry," Ravi said. "Medium." Nessa blinked. "Not mild." Ravi smiled without looking up. "This is not a performance," he said. "They asked to taste human food, so I will make them human food. Not the version that has been adjusted and softened and apologized for. The real version. The one my grandmother made on a Tuesday evening when nobody special was coming for dinner on the day of the demonstration. The grand consumption floor was standing room only. Species that had never visited the dining hall appeared in the galleries. Commander Brell stood near the medical team with his arms folded. Delegate Foran sat in the front row with his translation device active and his expression carefully neutral. 5 panelists were seated at a long table. A Drenai female, a Hiluvan male, a Varadi elder, a Prelian scholar with delicate amber-colored antennae, and a Gorand, a massive creature with stone-like skin and a reputation for having almost no functional taste receptors. Ravi cooked in front of them. He did not rush. He heated oil in a heavy pan and added whole spices, cumin seeds, cardamom, cloves, a cinnamon stick, and let them crackle until the aroma filled the hall. He added onions and cooked them slow and golden. He added ginger and garlic and stirred until the raw edge burned away. He added tomatoes, turmeric, red chili powder, coriander, and garam masala, and he let the sauce simmer until it thickened and darkened into something that smelled like warmth itself. He added the chicken, stirred through the sauce, and covered the pan. The entire floor was silent except for the sound of simmering. When it was ready, he served 5 plates. Each one had rice, curry, and a piece of fresh naan. He set them in front of the panelists and stepped back. The Drenai went first. She lifted a spoonful, hesitated, then ate. Her eyes widened. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and immediately took another bite. She finished her entire plate in under 2 minutes. Then she picked up the naan, tore it in half, and used it to scoop the remaining sauce from the plate. She looked up at the silent crowd and said one word. "More." The Hiluvan panelist was more cautious. He took 3 small spoonfuls, one after another, each one slower than the last. Sweat appeared on his gray forehead. His hands trembled slightly, but he did not stop. He ate half the plate, set down his spoon, and sat very still with his eyes closed. The Prelian scholar ate delicately, her antennae twitching with each bite. She made no sound, but her amber markings flushed a deep gold, which Ravi later learned was an involuntary sign of deep pleasure in her species. The Varadi elder ate steadily and without expression, which was normal for his kind. But when he finished, he folded his thick hands on the table and nodded once. A single nod from a Varadi elder carried more weight than a standing ovation from any other species. The Gorn ate last. He was the one Ravi had been watching. His species processed almost nothing through taste. They ate for fuel, not experience. Their sensory range was considered the narrowest in the known galaxy. The Gorn took one bite. Then he set down his spoon and sat perfectly still. The medical team leaned forward, checking their monitors. He looked up at Ravi with small, deep-set eyes that had never shown surprise before. "I have never tasted anything," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stone grinding against stone. "In my entire life, food has been nothing, just material." He paused. "This is not nothing." The medical scans came back one by one. Elevated pleasure responses across all 5 panelists. Mild cardiovascular stimulation. Increased neural activity in regions associated with memory and emotional processing. Point 0 toxicity. 0 adverse effects. 0 signs of dependency. Commander Brell watched the results appear on the overhead display. He said nothing. His jaw tightened, and he turned and walked out of the hall without a word. Delegate Foreign remained seated. He stared at the empty plates, at the medical data, at the 5 panelists who showed no sign of wanting to leave. Ravi stood behind his cooking station, apron stained, hands still warm from the pan. He caught Ness's eye in the crowd. She was smiling. He smiled back. The complaint was dismissed at noon the following day. The council's ruling was brief and unanimous. All ingredients used by the human food stall have been verified as biologically safe for every known species on Horizon Ring. The neurological responses observed were consistent with natural flavor processing, not chemical manipulation. No grounds existed for closure, restriction, or further investigation. Then the council did something no one expected. They issued a cultural exchange license to the Earth stall. Permanent, unrestricted. The first such license ever granted to a human establishment on any galactic station in the history of the Commons. Advisor Sahi delivered the news to Ravi herself. She stood at his counter, holding the official document, and for the first time in 6 years of diplomatic service, she did not have a prepared speech. She simply handed him the paper and said congratulations. Ravi read it, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his apron beside the spice-stained cloth he used to wipe his hands. Then he started prepping for the dinner service. The weeks that followed changed Horizon Ring in ways that no one could have predicted and no one could fully explain. The stall expanded. Not physically. The counter and kitchen stayed the same size. But Ravi added more dishes. Lamb Rogan Josh on Mondays. Chana masala on Wednesdays. Fish curry on Fridays. Made with whatever aquatic protein the variety fishermen brought him from the station's hydroponic tanks. Weekend specials that rotated through regional traditions from across Earth. A coconut-based curry from the South one week, a rich, dark Kashmiri preparation the next. The line never shortened. If anything, it grew. But the most remarkable change was not the food. It was what happened around it. Species that had maintained formal distances for decades began sitting together. Not because of any diplomatic initiative or council resolution, but because Ravi's stall had only 18 seats, and when the place was full, you sat where there was room. A Hiluvan banker found himself sharing a table with 2 Drenai cargo workers and a Varadi mechanic. They argued about whether the biryani was better than the butter chicken. The argument lasted 40 minutes, grew loud enough to draw a small crowd, and ended with all 4 of them ordering the dal just to have a neutral ground to agree on. It happened again the next day. And the next. Strangers eating together, talking, disagreeing about food, which was the safest and most human kind of disagreement there was. Commander Brell never returned to the stall. But one morning, Ravi found a small data chip left on the counter before the stall opened. It contained a single message in Hiluvan formal script. It said the investigation had been conducted fairly and the results were accepted. It was not an apology. It was not praise. But from a Hiluvan security commander, it was as close to respect as the species could manage. Delegate Foreign came back. Not during the day, when the crowds would see him. He came late at night, after the grand consumption floor had emptied and the lights had dimmed to their sleep cycle setting. He stood at the counter in the half-dark and asked Ravi if it was too late to order. Ravi heated a pot and made dal. Simple, clean, honest. Lentils, turmeric, cumin, a tadka of garlic, and dried chilies finished in hot ghee. Foreign ate slowly. When he finished, he sat with the empty bowl in front of him and did not move for a long time. "I have been alive for 93 years, he said. "I have eaten nutrient paste for every meal of my life. It is efficient. It is optimal. It provides exactly what my body needs. He paused. It has never once made me feel anything. He looked up at Ravi. I did not know food could do this. Ravi sat down across from him. It is not the food, he said. It is the care. Someone chose these spices. Someone decided how long to cook them and how much heat to use and when to stop. Someone made this for you. That is what you were tasting. Foreign was quiet for a while. Then he asked Ravi to teach him how to make it. They spent 2 hours in the kitchen that night. Ravi showed him how to wash the lentils, how to measure the turmeric by color rather than weight, how to listen for the moment when the cumin seeds crackled in the oil. Foreign's hands were clumsy and uncertain, but he followed every instruction with the same focused intensity he brought to diplomatic negotiations. When the dough was ready, Foreign tasted it. His own dough, made with his own hands. He did not say anything. But he came back the next night. And the night after that, Nessa started working at the stall part-time. She learned to roll naan, to temper spices, to judge when a sauce had reduced enough by the way it moved in the pan. She told Ravi that on her homeworld, meals were consumed alone, in silence, in private rooms. Eating was considered a biological necessity, not a social act. She had never understood why humans gathered around tables until she started standing behind one. That IT is not about the food, she said one evening, watching a table of mixed species share a platter of biryani. It is about the table. Ravi nodded. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen, the small house in Rajasthan with the cracked walls and the gas stove that took 3 tries to light, the table that seated 6 but always held 8. The way his grandmother never asked if someone was hungry. She simply cooked, and the people came. The final evening of the station's trade cycle was traditionally quiet. Most vendors closed early. The grand consumption floor emptied out as species returned to their ships or quarters. Ravi kept his stall open. He cooked a full spread. Butter chicken, dal tadka, vegetable biryani, lamb rogan josh, fresh naan, rice, and a pot of chai that filled the air with cardamom and ginger. They came without being invited. Nessa first, then the Varadi dock workers, then the Drenai merchants, then a handful of Haluvans who pretended they were just passing through. A Prelian scholar sat beside a Goran engineer, and neither of them seemed to notice or care. The table filled. Then the seats around the table filled. Then aliens started standing, holding plates, eating and talking and reaching across each other for the naan. Ravi stood behind his counter and watched. He did not serve. He did not speak. He just watched them eat and argue and laugh and share, and he thought about what his grandmother had told him in the shuttle port. Food is how you tell someone who you are. If you hide your food, you hide yourself. He had not hidden. He had brought his spices across the stars, and he had cooked honestly, and the galaxy had tasted it and asked for more. Humanity's contribution to the Galactic Commons was never going to be warships. It was never going to be advanced technology or faster engines or superior weapons. The galaxy already had enough of those. What the galaxy did not have, what it had never even known it was missing, was a good curry and a table where everyone was welcome to sit. Ravi picked up a plate, served himself, and sat down among them.